Welcome to Your Doctor Wants to Quit, a podcast inspired by the need to save healthcare in America. I am Dr. Joy, a board-certified emergency physician, and I created this podcast to shed light on the challenges our healthcare system is facing through the multiple lenses of doctors, other healthcare professionals, and patients. By listening and working together, I believe we can fix healthcare in America for all of us.
Who is responsible? Because it's not even the technology that's not ready, but I wonder if the legal system is ready to have fully independent AI doctors. Because if the doctor gives you advice or comes up with diagnosis and treatment, they are ultimately the responsible one. Where if you have AI making recommendations, then who is going to make sure that that patient actually trusts the AI enough to follow advice?
You are hearing the voice of Ada Andruszkiewicz, co-founder and chief operating officer of Talkie AI, a voice AI platform built specifically for medical practices. Although Ada is not a physician, her expertise provides a unique lens as a product expert in digital health. And for the last 8 years of her career, she has followed the evolution of AI and its implementation in the healthcare space.
I'm Ada Andruszkiewicz from Talkie AI. I'm one of the co-founders and our COO. I started my professional career in London, actually. I spent nearly 12 years with Rightmove, one of the most beloved British brands. So this was a hands-on product role, and I learned that I love building stuff, and I cannot be a consultant. I cannot have my role just be presentations and advice. I had various roles there: product and leadership and delivery, managerial. I ran the software team for many, many years. But after 12 years in London, I needed a bit of a change. With 3 kids, it's a very difficult city to live in. So we decided to move to Warsaw, where I'm originally from. When I moved, I still continued to work for Rightmove with one of the software houses here. And through the software house, I met my co-founders. So the 3 of us decided that it would be great to build something together. We got along as people. We all felt like we have our unique skills and competencies we can put into this company. And we became interested in AI, like voice AI. Back in 2018, it was a completely different world from today. So our idea was that we will build a platform that anyone who is not technical can use to build voice bots. Back then, voice agents were not a thing. So these were just simple voice bots. And as we built the company, we had more and more clients. We felt that we don't want to be an agency. We don't want to build a very, very custom and different implementation for clients in different industries, because in some of the industries, we just didn't feel like our hearts are in it. We didn't want to be just a marketing gimmick or debt collection. It's super practical, but we just didn't feel like this would inspire us to build a company. So when we had our first healthcare client, we felt like healthcare is the perfect industry where what we do, which is talking to people on the phone with AI, really make a difference. Because healthcare is a special industry where you have a really high intensity of contact. This contact is still on the phone, no matter where. In the US, it's over 70% of the interactions between practices and patients are on the phone. So this contact is really intense. People are on the phone and people ask the same questions. The processes are similar. And also the differences in the traffic that practice gets is so vast that you cannot bridge this gap with people. On the Monday morning, you will have like 200 times more calls within just a couple of minutes. Your Monday tends to be your most busy day and then levels off. January tends to be the most busy month. So these are things that make it impossible to deal with that demand for contact by hiring more people, because you cannot clone them. You cannot hire someone for 15 minutes a day. You hire 200 people and then you need just 3 for the other part of the day. So we felt like with healthcare, oh my gosh, the planets align. Like we can provide a really meaningful product. There is a huge need for this product, and we can put our hearts and our time into this to build a proper product, not just be an agency to build whatever people want us to build. This first client was quite open. They let us understand the types of processes that are taking the most of their time, and they can be automated quite safely and easily. So we moved into confirming appointments, then into prescription refills, any FAQs people may have, and finally into appointment booking, which is the most complex process that requires a lot of knowledge of how practices do this. And also it just requires you to have a much more advanced technology. Back in 2018, you could not have as smooth of a conversation about booking as you can now, because before it was all rule-based. So we gave you some times, and then if you said, do you have anything between Christmas and New Year? We would say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Whereas now our system can understand these more sophisticated ways that patients state their preferred time, because they will think in natural language. So they will often say, so do you have anything on Wednesday mornings, but before 12 or between Christmas and New Year? So this is exactly how we progressed with building knowledge, as well as having a much better technology at hand than we had in the beginning of the journey.
So because not all of our listeners are techies, a lot of them are just average people who are trying to understand how AI fits into healthcare. And I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say fear, but maybe hesitancy in believing that AI can really safely fit in to a lot of healthcare processes, and concern that the stakes are higher in healthcare because if you have an error, it could affect somebody's health versus, in a debt collector, like you were mentioning, maybe somebody just doesn't pay their bill versus something goes wrong with their health is a much bigger problem. And so I think it would be worth, since you do have so much industry expertise and have been following AI for so long, just explaining how AI has evolved. You mentioned rules-based AI was what you had to work with in the beginning, and now with LLM models. Maybe you could just paint the landscape of how the technology has progressed and how that's changed the safety and efficacy of using these kinds of tools in a setting where the stakes are a bit high.
Oh, wow, this is a huge question. If we break down this whole process, first we have to understand what someone's saying. So we are using tools and models to convert your voice into text, because text is the input into models. Once we have the text, we teach our model to understand the different things that the patient can say. And we have to not only be able to understand in human language, but also understand what this means for the practice. So if someone says, my knee is hurting, I need to see someone, we need to deduct they want to see an orthopedist. We need to understand that certain doctors only treat hips and they don't treat knees. We have to understand how such appointments should be assigned according to the practice's rules. So there is a lot that goes on to understanding a really simple sentence of my knee's hurting, I need to see someone. First, it's the quality of the voice to text recognition, and then there is the quality of understanding what does someone actually mean, which is quite multidimensional, as I mentioned. So when we started, we could see that the technology to recognize your voice was nowhere near to what it is now. There was a lot of errors in spelling in the transcript itself, how you said your name, how you said dates or numbers. Now the accuracy is excellent. We used to use more rule-based recognition engines, and now, of course, we use large language models, which have their own issues, which is mainly hallucination. With large language models, what we do is first of all, we use kind of like an agent mesh, multi-agent architecture. So our agents have a very narrow specialty in what they are allowed to do. For example, when you are canceling an appointment, you ring us and you say, I want to cancel my appointment. So the first agent that talks to you is like a coordinator. Then they understand that what you want to do is cancel, and they pass your call to the specialized AI canceling agent who specializes just in that. And they are very restricted in what they can do, which heavily helps in removing hallucinations. So this agent, they know they're allowed just to cancel. And once you've canceled, they know they have a free slot. So they will pass the task to our waitlist agent, who will then contact patients who are on the waitlist to fill in the gap that was just created by you canceling. So if you narrow down what your agents can do and you're very specific in telling them what they can and cannot do, and you monitor their calls, and then you evaluate whether they behaved according to the rules. For every call of course this is automated, but for every call, we verify if the agent behaved according to the rules and according to what they are allowed to do, then you're building a holistically safe process that prevents hallucinations. And of course, sometimes you will get the odd hallucination, which usually is within a safe space, like the agent will repeat something a couple of times, or they will repeat what you said in a very literal way, but they know they are not allowed to, for example, make up appointments that don't exist. AI really wants to please you. This is one thing that we've noticed. If we don't really restrict them, if they don't have an appointment for you, they'll just make one up and say, you wanted something for Wednesday, even if I don't have it, I'm just going to promise you that I do. So we have to be really restrictive in this is what you can do and this is what you cannot do in a very narrow specialty.
Wow, that's so interesting. I almost don't know what to say. When you start talking about AI really wants to please me.
It does.
That's a little bit scary, but I just think also too, it's so interesting, the conversation about preventing hallucinations, because I think that speaks to how we keep AI safe and make sure that we have checks and balances in place so that it doesn't go off the rails with a mind of its own, so to speak. Maybe for people who aren't familiar with the concept of AI hallucination, you could just give a brief description of that.
So the AI large language models are predictive models. Based on the data that they have and the different magic that happens inside of them, they will give you the best prediction that they can generate that pretty much matches the question that you asked. So they are effectively in their core predictive models. And this is really interesting with the way the data that you train them on influences their answer. If they have a lot of data and input that sways them one way or the other, they will be more likely to give you this particular answer.
What's interesting about that is I think it begs an ethical question, right? Because you're talking about how you can ensure that when you're training your models, you're training them according to being able to serve all kinds of people, right? You could create an echo chamber using AI because it's only going to try to please you, like you said, and it only knows what you tell it. And so if you restrict the information that you're telling AI, then it can't give you an unbiased answer because it can't come up with something that's never learned, right? It's really a lot to think about the different ways that this could go. I think on the one hand, you at Talkie have been really clever and creative in carving out a piece of AI that really is more mechanical in a sense. You're really trying to help reduce the administrative burden of a practice, but not really getting involved in clinical decision making. However, I can see how there could be some scope creep in triage, because if a patient calls and says, I'm bleeding or I'm having chest pain, I mean, the patient can decide to say whatever they want, and then AI agent has to decide what to do with that information. And so I'm wondering, even though you've carved out this more mechanical piece to help offload the work that the front desk has to do, I'm sure that this comes up, that you end up dabbling a little bit in how to handle those kinds of expressions that patients might make, and what do you do with those now, and is there a plan to evolve that over time?
This is super interesting, by the way. Like, I love this topic because what we try to do is work with the practice in order to understand how this process works without AI. So we try to understand how to best match what people say with the reaction their front desk would have. And there are, of course, some general intents that we would treat the same for most practices, which are all the emergency expressions that patients say. We detect that this is an emergency. We either forward the call to an on-call provider or we urge the patient to call 911. Most of our practices want us to urge patients to call 911 in case of any urgencies and emergencies, because this is what they would do normally with a human operator. But everything else we categorize with the practice to understand how they would assign appointments.
It sounds like you're able to blend the best of the out-of-the-box tool that you've created with customizing it to that particular practice's workflow. But what I'm getting at is the definition of what is an emergency. Because I feel like that is one conundrum that even though you've tried to put a fence around what your domain of expertise is, I can see how that fence might try to be penetrated by certain things that fall into a gray area. For example, if somebody says, I'm bleeding, or I can't breathe, or I'm having chest pain, those are obvious emergencies. But if someone says, I'm having abdominal pain, it may not be an emergency, or it might be. And so the possibilities of what could go sideways if the AI gives the wrong advice are kind of endless. And we struggle with that as well as a practice with our front desk and making sure they have the right protocols for triaging patients. I mean, the human beings struggle with that too, right? You don't have a doctor picking up the phone and answering the patient's call. I'm not going to answer it for you, but I'm imagining there's some way of deciding when a handoff is necessary because the AI can't decide.
I'm not sure I can say a lot more on top of what I said before, which is as we work with more and more practices, we accumulate the right way for the AI to behave based on a larger pool of data. And we can kind of confirm that in this case, do this. But patients and their process always leave the gate open for the patient to be able to ask for transfer. The problem is when someone cannot pick up on the other side.
Yeah. So it takes commitment on the side of the humans to partner with the AI and to not make the AI look bad, by just kind of completely disengaging from those tasks that the AI can't complete. So
I think this is essential. So we think of it like a relay race. We carry the baton for part of the journey, but unless everybody else works together, it's not going to be a good experience for the patient, no matter what we do.
So we have to learn to play in the sandbox with the AI agents, we have to make friends with AI and work as a team.
Exactly. I think so. And the more feedback the practice gives us, the better we can make the agent for them.
Shifting topics a little bit, I think it's really interesting how we're having this conversation around what Talkie's focus is and how it might relate to some of the other companies that are out there that are trying to not just create phone agents for healthcare practices, but actually potentially do some of the heavy lifting for physicians in counseling patients. And I think the approach to that is probably similar to what you're describing, is that there needs to be some way that the human doctors and the AI, medical professional AI, whatever you want to call them, work together, because the stakes are much higher and getting it wrong can really lead to poor outcomes. I think that's one of my biggest fears. I'm not so concerned that my job is going to be replaced by a robot. I just think there's the art of medicine and there's a part of it that requires human connection that you just can't replace with something that's automated. However, I do see that there are ways that AI can help doctors be more effective and also help expand our reach, especially given the fact that we just don't have enough doctors to care for all the patients that have needs in a timely fashion. And so how you do that, how you put that workflow together and coordinate between the doctors and the AI is, I think, really difficult. I know that there are some companies that are trying to do that, but I think the challenges that you've resolved fairly efficiently and effectively in Talkie, where you can quality control all of the phone calls and what was said, and you can identify when there's hallucinations, and you can do all of that. I wonder how that plays out when you try to take the same concept and you apply it to giving medical advice. Do you have any thoughts on things to watch out for or promising aspects of what could be achieved?
So I think from what I know, a lot of success is achieved in analyzing images using AI to actually interpret different X-rays and different, imaging from different scans, because there is a lot of data that can help train the AI here. But for me, when I have these discussions, it's always, so who is responsible? Because it's not even the technology that's not ready, but I wonder if the legal system is ready to have a fully independent AI doctors. From what I know, nothing of that sort can be actually used anywhere. Because if the doctor gives you advice or comes up with diagnosis and treatment, they are ultimately the responsible one. Where if you have AI making recommendations, then, who is going to take responsibility? Who is going to make sure that that patient actually trusts the AI enough to follow advice? We know that patients, even if they have a prescribed course of treatment by doctors, they sometimes don't follow the advice, forget to take medication. If it's going to be all prescribed by AI, then who's going to take responsibility? So if we do want to do that, it's going to have to be a process that's also where the legal system even creates space for this kind of solution. So again, for me, AI is a tool. It's almost like there to unburden physicians and helps them almost like process their thoughts quicker by giving them access to data and to the second opinion. But I also agree that in no way doctors should fear that their jobs will be taken. There's such a shortage of doctors anywhere in the world that it's almost like this perhaps can just ease the debt of lack of doctors that we currently have. And I mean, this is experienced anywhere that we work. Everybody's saying there's not enough doctors. But also, AI can process data, but it cannot yet touch a person to come up with a diagnosis. Yeah, like to make anything robotic in 3D, it's very, very hard. And especially when it comes to human body, you can show it a scan and say, okay, what is the most likely thing that this is, but you will not replace the actual human connection. But also surgery, I'm not sure how quickly we will say to AI, okay, you've got this, the surgical robot, now just carry out this surgery by yourself. I think we are really, really far from that. We can see how something as simple as driving a car, that's still, we are not all sitting in cars and watching TV while it's driving itself. So here, I think if AI can help process even the information during a visit, can help analyze imaging, can help perhaps analyze the outcomes of the visit, yes, that's really beneficial and I think really helpful to physicians. But anything 3D, we're very far from that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It makes me think of an example in my own personal experience. I'm a doctor, but I also have been a patient a time or two. A few years ago, I had some abdominal pain and went to the emergency department to have it evaluated because it was quite severe. And I had both a CT scan and an ultrasound that were read at least by humans, but possibly by AI too, because there already is like detection software that helps assist radiologists in providing their interpretation. Anyway, so both of these scans came back not showing any stones in my gallbladder. It looked like my gallbladder was a little bit stretched, but they didn't really see any blockages or anything. And yet my liver enzymes were elevated. There were some other signs that things were going the wrong direction. My white blood cell count was high. That being said, the thing that cinches the diagnosis of cholecystitis in absence of imaging is really physical exam. I mean, the doctor that was examining me would have to press on my abdomen and get a certain response or a certain feel to verify, okay, yeah, right in that location of where the gallbladder is, there's a certain response on exam. It's a combination of those things that even when what you would think would be the most objective thing, which is the imaging, doesn't point to the diagnosis, you have to have a high enough clinical suspicion to integrate the other pieces of data that are pointing you in a direction to say, hey, this is likely a surgical emergency. This person needs to be rushed to the operating room. If we were to rely just on AI analyzing the imaging and making that decision if surgery was required, the answer would have been no. And I wouldn't have done very well. So, I mean, in the end, I did get rushed to surgery and had my gallbladder removed on an emergency basis, and it saved my life. And when they took the gallbladder out, physically, they were able to see there was a giant stone that was wedged into the neck of the gallbladder that wasn't visible on imaging. And so I think it kind of speaks to the fact that the AI is only as smart as the data that you feed it. And then there's certain pieces of the puzzle that are difficult to capture with these tools. And so human still has to be involved in putting all of those pieces together and connecting the dots. Like you said, the 3D robot, functioning in 3D, I think is still a long way out. And I think it's a good analogy, like you said, that, I mean, how many people do you know would even feel safe or comfortable being a passenger in a self-driving car? I'm not sure that I would feel very at ease, even if it was the most technologically advanced self-driving car. Even with, Tesla, they have the self-driving mode, but you still have to sit in the driver's seat and be able to take over if there's a failure in the system or, that kind of thing. So I think for AI and medicine, it has to be the same. The doctor still has to be in the driver's seat. And how that all comes together from a business case and where the liability is placed and all of that, I think is really interesting to see how that's going to evolve.
But also, when you think about it, also who is going to pay for the treatment that AI prescribes? From what I know, there are some companies who are creating these AI agents to actually be AI physicians. But I think so far, this kind of a diagnosis is either free or very low cost. Now, in the long run, how are these businesses going to be sustained? I don't know. This is not really my area of expertise, but it's really interesting whether patients will actually pay for these services rather than say, okay, well, if I'm to just get diagnosis from AI, I'm just going to use my normal GPT or Gemini account to do this. So they will have to really find a differentiator that gives people incentives to pay for this kind of treatment or get the payers to somehow, I don't know, transfer funds for these kind of visits. Mm-hmm. So this is very interesting. I'll be eager to watch how this pans out.
Yeah, I think the entity or individual that gets paid is probably going to end up being the one who holds the liability, right? So, are companies ready to take on the liability of a wrong diagnosis the same way physicians have for all of these decades? I don't know. Most technology companies that I speak with, they say, we're not a medical device because we don't want the liability. We want to put medical professionals in between us and the patient so that medical professionals continue to carry the liability. And so I think the way that you structure a business model that leverages AI, physicians still have to be in the mix and have to take the responsibility for the outcome, especially because the AI technology can't get us all the way down the field, right? Like the physician has to take the baton and carry it the final 10 yards. So I think that the industry is going to have to structure it around physicians taking on a leadership role in how these tools get implemented. But it is going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I think the physicians must be quite torn what to use as well, and almost like overburdened with the array of options that they now have in terms of any clinical decisions. How does one decide what's credible or not, what to use? Almost like is it easier sometimes just to rely on your own knowledge? I don't know, but I think it's an amazing and a really intense time for physicians nowadays.
I think medical education is going to evolve too. And one of the things that I worry about is that we inadvertently, when I say we, I mean physicians, speaking for physicians, that we inadvertently relinquish our authority over time as new generations of physicians are trained in an era where AI can do most of the work for them. Because to become an expert in something, I think you really have to understand it on a deep level. You have to know the fundamental. There's no shortcut to becoming an expert, but if the medical workforce is restructured in a way that leverages AI to do the heavy thinking and lifting, then how does that affect the practice of medicine and the experience that younger generations of physicians gain over time by having to think through these problems independently without the assist of AI? That's one thing that worries me a lot. There's an element of what I learned over the course of, medical school, residency, and just being in practice. I worked in the emergency department for 11 years before I stepped into primary care. We have this concept in emergency medicine called sick or not sick. It's this idea that you can walk into the room and within the first 2 seconds of witnessing what's going on, determine if that patient is unstable and going down, downhill versus if that's somebody that has more time to kind of figure out what's going on and it's a little bit of a safer situation. That gestalt or gut instinct or whatever you want to call it, there's an intelligence behind it that we don't really know how to articulate, but that comes with experience. And I just wonder for those kinds of things where the expertise is more reliant on experience and kind of struggling through working up a difficult diagnosis or seeing something go a direction you didn't expect, and having the benefit of many, many times, like repetition, being in chaotic situations and learning maybe subconsciously, how to navigate those properly. Sort of like simulation training. The reason we do simulation training for codes, for example, is because there's just an element of how to act in an emergency situation that you can't teach, you can't learn from a book. There's something that's more nuanced than that. And I think that piece of it, I worry that it becomes undervalued as we focus more on these kinds of training and intellectual model, that's based on book knowledge.
It's almost like being in that when you're observing what is going on with patients is quite multidimensional. You can pick up things that AI couldn't pick up, or at least you would need a very invasive AI to pick that up. I'm not sure you would want a very invasive AI in your emergency room. I mean, this is like beyond my knowledge, but I imagine that if you had lots of cameras who then analyzed the imaging combined with the data of these patients, you could probably build some crazy complex models that would almost overlay. I can imagine you as the emergency room coordinator. It can give you these hints of this patient, with the predictability of 90%. Then it just becomes so complex. It's actually then easier for you to do without this noise of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting what you said about expertise. I'm worried. I mean, I've got 3 kids and they're not using AI not very intensely yet, but I'm just thinking how tempting it is to make life easier with AI nowadays.
But it's this idea of you rely on it too much, right? Because, for example, in the story I told you, the imaging didn't give the diagnosis. Yeah. If you don't have the skill set to figure out what's going on without relying on the imaging, how are you going to make the right decision? And I can see that translating into how AI gets implemented as well. Like if you can't think through, those critical thinking skills aren't there because you haven't practiced them. You haven't thought through your medical decision making because you've let AI do it for you. And when AI hallucinates or comes up with the wrong answer, how are you going to be smarter than the AI to come up with what's really going on and to solve the problem?
That's really interesting. So it's almost like to use AI safely, you have to combine the recommendations giving you, but also with the input that it doesn't have access to, just like you said. So you have access to, the patient's body itself that AI cannot process. And this is the only way you can pick up when it's actually wrong, because you have a broader array of inputs. That's really interesting.
Yeah, like things that you couldn't really articulate or put into an algorithm that are hard to teach, that I notice, say when I walk into a patient room and I'm doing an evaluation, is like, how does the room smell? Does the patient's skin look dusky? Does it look a little bit of off color? Is there a yellowish hue to it, or does it look kind of bluish? Are their mucous membranes dry or moist? What is their breathing pattern? Does it look like it's a distressed breathing pattern, or does it look like it's easy and smooth? That's even before I touch the patient. And just those kinds of nuances really are major indicators in like whether the patient is in distress or not. And those are things that the AI doesn't know. I don't know how we ever really replicate that, It's interesting to think about. Yeah.
It's because you're processing so many different pieces of information that are so sensory, right? Because you're talking about sensory information that you're processing with your senses rather than with just analysis of, they're not numbers, or because you can turn image into numbers. So it's like it's the senses, the smell, the temperature that you probably can tell. You would have to do a lot of work to input this data into the model, right? Like if it cannot just process this the same way that you do, it's going to be more work to actually input the data, even if the model is trained. No idea how that can be done, but maybe we will be proved wrong, and in a couple of years you'll have this detector.
Also, the subtleties of communication style, like if somebody's taking a breath between each word and their speech is like staccato, that's also an indicator of distress. If somebody is speaking and they repeat themselves, you're wondering, okay, are they processing information correctly? Is there something going on metabolically that's affecting how their brain is functioning? Or is there some type of ischemic event, like a stroke or something, right? So if you and I were having a conversation, depending on the cadence of your speech and how many times you might ask me the same thing, or if you explain something and it's mostly logical, but there's a piece of it that you kind of are like, wait, that didn't quite add up. Something's odd here. And that's not even asking a medical question, right? That's just observing a speech pattern. All of those things factor in. How do you account for that?
No idea. No, this is like, I think this is so complex. That's like years, probably years ahead. But you made me think of a really interesting story. I was at Athena Health's Thrive event. So they had the president of the American Medical Association, and he was a keynote speaker at the conference. And he actually told a story that I think will really resonate with you. So he said he was meeting with some colleagues as part of the MAA, and he was delivering a speech. And after the speech, a couple colleagues came up and said, "Listen, Bobby, you're not sounding like you used to. There's something off. How do you feel? Like, do you have a headache? Blah, blah." And they actually diagnosed, just from him sounding different to how he used to sound, that there must be something wrong with his brain. There must be something putting pressure on the brain. And, the next day he was having a scan, and within a couple of weeks he had his tumor removed. And he said, how many people have a chance to be diagnosed by top surgeons in a room and then be privileged to have this treatment so quickly, But it's not like he picked up on the symptoms. It's other people who picked up on the subtleties that you mentioned that he was not aware of. And even his family wasn't aware of. And they pretty much saved his life because he had some kind of a tumor that they removed. And he made a full recovery. And, of course, he tells the story, and he is a charming man. He tells the story really brilliantly. But can AI ever do that? I'm not sure. I don't know whether it takes a room of trained physicians to be able to put the two together.
It is clear that AI has an important and growing role in healthcare. But as we spoke, another theme also began to emerge. With the advent of AI, how does our reliance on technology impact or potentially interfere with the way we practice medicine? And what are its limitations? After all, medicine is both an art and a science. AI may be able to provide and assist with the science. But what about the art? I worry, because of the advances of technology, that the emphasis on the art of medicine on the conventional side is diminishing. But it's still something that I think has a lot of value and is not spoken of. I can remember in training in the emergency department, just this older attending physician who everybody looked up to, and he was like a Jedi. He could walk into the room and within 5 minutes, he could say, "This person's having a basilar stroke." And all of us would be like, "What?" And he'd be like, "Get an MRI." I'm like, well, normally we don't always get an MRI, with somebody that has these symptoms, but this guy, must be having this type of stroke because Dr. So-and-so said it, and he's always right, and he always was right. So how do you hone that? How do you teach that? That's something that gets passed on. It's like the tradition of medicine and passing down the art of the field. That's how osteopaths learn, right? Is through mentorship and apprenticeship and watching other people and gaining their own experience. You can't read it in a book. You have to lay hands in order to figure it out. And like I said, AI can't really lay hands on people.
Not yet.
That's true.
No, I do. I mean, of course, sometimes I guess AI can help you, and it perhaps can help doctors just bounce their thoughts with someone. For me, sometimes even the fact that to interact with AI, and I'm here not really talking about Talkie, but using AI models, you have to really organize your thoughts to ask the question well, to get a meaningful answer. So it's almost like in the process of using AI and phrasing your thoughts, because this is a dialogue, you actually come up with the answer by yourself. But because you are forced to make it more precise, think about what you want to ask and how, it brings you closer to the answer rather than just having your thoughts disorganized. Like, I'm a visual person. For me, writing stuff down, organizing it in bullets, like, it just helps me think. I don't want to demonize AI too much. This is our business as well. But I'm thinking that if it forces you that way to process your thoughts then it's positive. If you just, without thinking, delegate stuff to AI, if we were just to say, okay, write me a blog post about this and that, it's just going to be crappy quality no matter what you do. But if you use it like a partner to exchange ideas and to actually see, are there any things that I didn't think about? Then it can be almost like your sparring partner that helps you make your thoughts more precise and analyze your ideas rather than completely outsource that idea to it.
Almost like querying for a second opinion. What did I miss? What did I forget? Or what new data is out there that I just am not aware of yet? And then integrating that into your current thinking model.
Absolutely.
Almost we need like a standard operating procedure for how physicians should use AI, like what is the appropriate use case, and help teach new trainees how to do that from the beginning of medical school, and like retooling medical schools to incorporate these new technologies in a way that's ethical and doesn't diminish or dilute medical training.
I think this would be a very interesting podcast episode. Exactly that. How are the curriculums changing, or how are these tools incorporated? How are they taught, or are they taught in medical schools, or is not happening yet? And it's just, so I think that's really interesting. Is we see the same in coding, for example. I've observed software developers for over 20 years now. In the beginning, they had to know everything and write code from scratch and stuff like this. And now those that have experience but can use tools they just have superpowers. They can write code much quicker, but they still have to understand how it's all structured together. So you will not get the architecture level done by AI yet, but the little things it can help you write. So it's almost like you're still the architect, but now you have more tools in your toolkit that can help you become this superpowered architect. Whether that's more tiring or not, I don't know. It sometimes makes me feel like it is, because you have so many options. But I feel like it will be the same with doctors. You have to still be the architect, but then you will have all these additional tools and sources of data that feed your decisions. But the decision is ultimately yours, and the selection of tools you're using and your knowledge of them. So that's how I think about it. But you will still have your own hands to, touch the patient and actually, as you've said, absorb them with all your senses.
And I think the success in how these tools get implemented and integrated into the medical profession in part are going to rely on the medical leadership embracing the tools and also guiding their implementation and not fearing them. I think sometimes there's a knee-jerk reaction from physicians to be afraid that AI is going to, AI is going to replace us. It's going to affect our job security, or this idea that we should resist AI in the medical space because it's too risky. I don't understand it. It's this thing that's nebulous that seems like, another thing that I have to now be responsible for. But I think if we go into it with the idea, we've got to figure out it's coming whether we want it to or not. And it's a tool that as physicians who would be using the AI, we should be the ones that are leading the charge in how these tools get implemented in a way that's safe for patients, because that's really our code of ethics, is to practice in a way that cares for people, that keeps them safe. I feel like physicians still have patients' best interest in mind. We're just wired that way. It is a profession, after all, not just a job. And there's a certain responsibility ethically that comes with that. But I think if we resist the tools, they're going to get implemented anyway, and then we're going to lose control of it. I think if we are more coordinated and can come together and come to a consensus on the best practices and how to incorporate these tools into the practice of medicine, and be forward-thinking in how we teach new trainees how to use the tools in an appropriate manner, it's going to make this transition to the era of AI in medicine so much smoother and work better for patients. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm urging my colleagues to embrace AI, to take the lead and to not be afraid of it, so that we can have a seat at the table, because ultimately I think we all feel responsible for the health and well-being of the public. That's what we signed up for when we went to medical school, is to take on that responsibility. And it's, I think, our duty as these new technologies evolve to help guide their use in clinical practice. Thank you for listening to Your Doctor Wants to Quit. I'm Dr. Joy, a board-certified emergency physician, and I created this podcast because I'm on a quest to fix healthcare through conversation. If you liked what you heard today, please follow this podcast and share it with your family, friends, and colleagues. By spreading awareness, we can bring about change. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Dr. Joy MD. That's DOCTOR Joy MD.